little of this. Oh, way to go, Lucy. I'm proud of you. You'll come up here and show everybody how you did that? No? Okay. All right. Well, you can be seated then. Everybody limbered up and warmed up enough. Whew. Actually, I just needed to do that for myself. I'm going to be talking about running this morning, and it fits with our lesson very well. You know, I have a hard time keeping in step with people. Those of you that have worked with me on things probably know that by now. But like when I was in junior high and high school, it seemed like whatever sport we were in, one of the things we had to do to get in shape was run to the top of Bond Hill. There was a road that went outside of Sonora, went up this hill. The hill was called Bond Hill. And our coaches, for whatever sport we were in, I think we even had to do it in band once. But anyway, they'd say, run to the top of Bond Hill and back. It was only about a half mile up and half a mile back. And it wasn't an extremely tall or steep hill. But they would always have someone set the pace for us. We all were supposed to run together and stay together in that pack, following the pace of the person he had chosen. And you know, they always chose the fastest people that you were supposed to keep up with. They never chose me to set the pace. I don't know why. I guess they didn't want us walking it, but I never could keep up with that pace setter very well. I was usually, you know, kind of towards the end coming in. Last year when Dory and I were training for the half marathon that we ran in September, she would often complain that I was running too fast, that I was running ahead of her. And I used to tell her, you know, babe, I'm running the pace we always run. You're just slowing down. And she would get upset because I was always in front. I guess, you know what they say, if you're not the lead dog, the view never changes. And she got tired of the view never changing, always looking at me. And so one day I decided I was going to be nice. I was going to let her run in front. I would let her set the pace. Well, evidently she had her Wheaties that morning. Because when we hit about mile 3 of about a 5-mile run, she took off. And I seriously thought she was going to kill me just trying to keep up with her, you know. And we got done with the end of that run, and I remember I bent over and you know, I said, don't you ever say I'm running too fast again. I don't do well trying to keep up with other people. But at the same time, I don't do very well trying to set my own pace. Because this year, of course, Dory's not able to run with me, and I am training. I'm going to try to run that half marathon again. I'm trying to take 17 minutes off of my time, which is quite a bit, but that's kind of my goal. And so I've been running, and it's hard to run when you don't have somebody to run with you. Because here's the way I will do it. You know, I put on my headsets now. Since I don't have Dory to talk to me, I wear my iPhone and I plug it in, and it's got a little program. It'll tell me how far I've gone, how fast I've gone, and it plays power music. Probably one of the only people with a cappella power music, but I'll get out there and I'll start off running. Well, you know, the first song that comes on is a good fast song. It's, man, I'm really moving. I'm going to run 8-minute miles today. I'm going to run 8 of them, you know, and I'll take off and go up this little hill and down, and I'm coming down that hill, I really pick up the pace, and then I get to the second big hill. And by the time I get to the top of it, I am just... the other day, this guy comes out of the house and yells, "Are you okay?" "Just running." And so, then I slow down. I get to the top of the hill, and I'm like, well, you know, that was a lot of work. I deserve a break. And so I take a little break. Well, the road turns there. You can either go straight or you can go the back way. And so as I get to the turn, I start to turn because that's where I usually run. But I realize there's a little dip right there. If I go straight, it's flat. So I'll just go straight today. And so I do. And I've decided that I'm going to run 3 miles this day. And so my little phone, it tells me, you know, you've run 1.5 miles. You know, well, that's 3 miles if I turn around and go back. So I turn around and I go back. Well, when I get to the bottom of that big hill, I don't really want to run up that next hill again, so I just walk the rest of the way, because after all, I need to cool down, right? You know, and so what I do when I'm running by myself is I will whip out. One thing about Lori, even if she, would sometimes complain that I was running too fast or running too slow or whatever, she doesn't stop. I mean, she starts, if we're running 8 miles, she doesn't stop till she finishes 8 miles. And I'm one of these that's like, shouldn't we take a breath now or take a break now? Don't you think it would be healthy for us to rest? She don't stop. And so when I'm running by myself, I have to be real careful, or I end up getting tired, and I'll slow down, or I'll take a break, rest for a little bit, watch the birds, or something like that, And it's kind of human nature for us to want to set our own pace, to want to do things our own way, to stop and rest when we want to, take a break, or sprint for a little bit, and then lay down under a shade tree. It's kind of human nature. And we do the same thing, not just when we physically run, but we do the same thing in our spiritual race as well. I want you to think about how often, and Paul uses race language a lot of times when he's writing. And in fact, if you'll open your Bibles to Galatians chapter 5, verse 7, it's on page 826 in your pew Bibles. In Galatians, and you want to open there anyway because we're going to be in Galatians this morning. But in Galatians chapter 5, verse 7, on page 827, Paul says, "You were running a good race." And there's other places where Paul talks about the spiritual life as running a race. And Paul is going to be talking about the need to have a pace setter, because if we don't have a pace setter, then we won't train and we won't finish the race that we're supposed to be on. We would be like, and most of us have seen this, where someone gets baptized, gives their life to Christ, and they come out on fire. They're sprinting. You can't hold them back. They're doing everything. They want to get involved in everything there is. They want to be a part of it all. They want to do the work. They want to go to school, be a preacher. They are just on fire. How many of you have seen people like that? Yeah. And then after a little while, something will come up in their life. The first hill they have to go over. The first obstacle, the first challenge to their faith. And after they get through to that challenge, and after they have fought with that challenge for a little bit, they're not quite as enthusiastic. In fact, some of them want to take a break for a little while, rest for a little bit. Some of them fall back into old habits and begin doing things that aren't good for their spiritual life, but, after all, I'm my own pace setter. I do it my way. And so Paul talks in Galatians chapter 6 about us having a pace setter. Someone to run with us. Someone to set the pace so that we finish this race and finish it well. Look down in chapter 5, verse 25. In chapter 5, verse 25, Paul says, "Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit." Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. If we live by the Spirit, we have put our old life to death, our old self to death. We've been born again. We've been given the Spirit of God. We are in the race. If you're here and in the race, raise your hand. Okay. Now, our pace setter is the Spirit. And Paul is going to give us 8 instructions for how we are to live in step with the Spirit. How it is that we are supposed to be training. How it is that we are supposed to be running. So, how do we keep in step with the Spirit? 8 lessons. And if you want to write these down, it might not be a bad idea. First of all, Paul says you have to realize that you are not the pace setter. I am not the pace setter. Look at verse 26 of chapter 5. Let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other. let us not become conceited. Remember now that Paul is writing to a church where some people have come in and they think they have it right, and other people don't have it right. After all, they have understood now, and they have been taught and come to a realization that not only do they need Jesus, as Paul presented, but they also need circumcision. And they also need to keep some of the law. And by realizing that they are right, therefore everyone else is wrong, and that puffs them up, makes them think that they are their own pace setter. They are the one leading the way. And all that does is lead to divisions and fighting and arguing and bickering and all of these other things that I think we looked last week, Paul says those are fruits of the sinful nature. Paul says to realize that you are not the pace setter. Do not become conceited, provoking, and envying each other. The second thing is to stay together and don't run off and leave your brother. In chapter 6, verse 1, Paul says, "Brothers, if anyone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently. But watch yourselves, or you may be tempted." Stay together. Don't run off and leave your brother. We've all seen it before. People who start on the road to heaven, they're baptized into Christ, they're on fire, running the race, but then something trips them up. Maybe it's an old habit. Old people from their lives that have come back in and are starting to pull them back into something. Some tragedy that shakes their faith and makes them begin to question and begin to fall away. But sometimes what we do is we're so busy running the race ourselves, and we look back and we see them struggling and we see them hurting, but we just let them fall. We figure they can figure it out themselves. And we just keep running. It's kind of like that time, and I think I've told this story before, when I was living in an apartment in Amarillo, and the apartment had a pool, and there's a bunch of kids in the swimming pool. And they're all laughing and joking and playing around and stuff, and all of a sudden I realized they're all congregated in this one little area, and they're yelling and screaming, and they're splashing, and they're splashing, and they're splashing. And then I realized what they were doing. There was a big moth that had fallen down into the pool, and they were trying to splash it out because none of them wanted to touch it, and pick it up. Well, finally they got it splashed up onto the side of the swimming pool, and all these little kids are cheering, "Yay, yay, yay!" And so they turn around and go off to find another bug to rescue. Well, that little moth, I'm sitting there reading my book, and I can see the moth over here, and it's standing on this hot concrete, and it's just beating its wings. Just as fast as it can go. It was faster than this, okay? And he's just beating his wings, and just frantically beating his wings. And I remember thinking to myself, why doesn't he just stretch them out in the sunlight? It's hot, dry, Amarillo, Texas weather. It won't take long for him to dry if he just opens them up and lets them sit there. But he's flapping. And then I realized he's flapping trying to get away. But I didn't know what from. And I then caught a motion out of the corner of my eye. It was a bird. Jumped out of the bush, sat there and looked at the bug for a minute, hopped twice, watched the bug for a minute, hopped twice, and ate the bug. The kids who had rescued the bug were totally oblivious to the fact that what they had done is they had brought it out of the frying pan and right into the fire. And that's what we do sometimes. We rescue people, and then when they fall back into sin, we're too busy to go back and carry our brothers back out. And Paul says, if you see your brother in sin, those who are spiritual, and I'm not talking about the Oprah kind of spiritual or the Shirley MacLaine kind of spiritual. These are people, if you're led by the Spirit, if the Spirit is your pace setter, then you are going to go back and gently restore your brother. But, now keep this in mind with race language and running language. Paul says, your brother has quit running. Your brother has stopped and is doing something other than running the race now. When you stop to help your brother, don't stop and think, boy, this actually feels pretty good not to be running. I think I'll join you. You be careful that you don't fall into the same trap that they are in, but don't run off and leave your brother behind. The third instruction that Paul gives for running this race is to help each other out. Look at verse 2 of chapter 6. Paul says, carry each other's burden, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. You know, running and carrying something at the same time is hard. When Dory and I first started running, you have to carry water with you, and so we'd carry a water bottle. Well, when you start out, that water bottle is pretty heavy. And after a while, your hand gets tired, and so what we'd do is we'd take turns. I'd hold it for a little while, then she'd hold it for a little while, and then I'd hold it, and then she'd hold it. And then when it got empty, she'd be willing to hold it all the way, you know. But anyway. But you have to help each other out in carrying each other's burdens. Paul says that in this way you fulfill the law of Christ. I want you to look back into chapter 5, verse 14. The entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbor as yourself. That's the law. It sums up everything. And Paul now says the way that you fulfill the law of Christ is by carrying each other's burdens. God wants us to love each other, help each other out, not run off and leave our brother, but when we see our brother struggle, help them and carry their burdens when we can. The fourth thing is, don't give your brother something that you can carry yourself. Don't give your brother something you can carry yourself. In verse 4, he says, each one should test his own actions, and then he can take pride in himself without comparing himself to somebody else, for each one should carry his own load. Now it's very interesting. Paul just says carry your brother's load, but each one should carry his own load, which seems almost like a discrepancy. But what Paul is saying here is, don't give your brother something to carry that you can carry for yourself. And there's a very important reason for this. Imagine that you were running, and you're running every day, trying to get in shape, trying to stay and finish the race well, and every time you come to a hill, you turn to the person next to you and say, hey, I have a really hard time with hills. Can you carry me? And your buddy, being a great running mate that he is, says, sure, I'll help, hop on. And so you hop on, and he takes you up the top of the hill. Next time you come to a hill, you say, hey, I'm really having a hard time with this hill. Can you carry me? Sure, hop on. Well, let me ask you, are you ever going to get any good at running up hills if you never run up any hills? No. Paul says that everybody ought to carry their own load. You need to look at your actions. If you come to a struggle, if you come to a problem, you ought to try to work through it to the best of your ability. Now, there will be times when we can't carry our own load, and that's when we have to turn to our brothers, and our brothers ought to see that and help us out. But we ought to try to put our faith into practice and overcome the burdens that we can overcome, and remain strong and faithful, and don't give our brothers something that we can carry for ourselves. The fifth instruction that Paul gives for running this race is to share all good things with your instructor. In verse 6, I think this is interesting. He said, anyone who receives instruction in the Word must share all good things with his instructor. You know, it is important to have those around us who will encourage us and teach us, those who will show us how to avoid the rough spots, those who can say, don't go down that road because it's full of potholes and hills and other things that you don't want to mess with. Go down this road because it's better. Those who can instruct wisely. And Paul says to share all good things with your instructor. And I think that means all of the joy and the blessings and everything that you have. You know, you wouldn't be enjoying this race if it wasn't for the one giving you good instruction. You wouldn't be in the race. You wouldn't stay in the race. You wouldn't see that finish line looming ahead if it wasn't for those who gave you instruction. And Paul wants us all to remember that and keep those things in mind. So far, just so you've got these down. Number 1 is realize that you're not the pace setter. Number 2, stay together. Don't run off and leave your brother. Number 3 is to help each other out. Number 4, don't give your brother something that you can carry for yourself. Number 5 is to share all good things with your instructor. Number 6 is you can't fake it. You can't fake it. In verse 7, he says, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. The one who sows to please his sinful nature, from that nature will reap his destruction. The one who sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. A year ago, about 2 years ago, Dory and I ran our first half marathon. It was up in Wisconsin. And, it's all through the streets of the city. And I remember we're running along there, and this guy comes past me, and he's not running a whole lot faster than I am, so I stayed with him for a while, and I watched him for quite a while. And I noticed that at every corner, where everyone else stayed in the street and ran in the street, he would cut across through the yard. Just a couple of feet, just a yard or two. But he always cut every corner there was. And I remember, as I'm staying in the street, thinking, that's not right. I'm having to run further than this guy. And we do that same thing in our spiritual walk sometimes, is we like to cut corners. Okay? I know what God says is this, but I'll do most of it, but I'll just do this. And we cut corners. And we're not fooling anyone. If the race requires us to run to the finish line, we got to run the whole race to the finish line. And God cannot be mocked. He can't be deceived. We're not fooling anyone. So you can't fake it. And then the 7th instruction is don't give up. In verse 9, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Do not give up. Along the race route, as you're going along there'll be tables set up. And you'll come to a table after a little while, and they'll have all kinds of cups there with water or Gatorade, and the people will be standing out there to hand them to you, and you'll run up and you'll take a cup from them, and when you do, they're just constantly telling you, way to go, good job, you're doing great, keep it up, keep it up. And that encourages you more than you realize. And then you run a little further, and somebody's standing out there with one of those energy goo packs, and you'll take one of those, and as soon as you take it from their hand, they're all standing there yelling at you. You're doing great, keep it up, keep it up. You go a little further, and there's a table, and people are standing out there giving you little bits of banana or apples or oranges or bagel or something like that. And they're all telling you, you're doing great, you're doing great. As you run along, there are people holding up signs, keep it up, you're doing great. One sign somebody said, this seemed like a good idea 3 months ago, didn't it? But keep it up. People holding up signs, it feels great, doesn't it? And that just encourages you. Each mile, you're a mile closer. Come over onto the arsenal, and you know that you're down to the end, and you're coming across that last bridge, and the crowd is so much bigger, and people are standing there, and they're yelling and they're cheering, and you turn that last corner, and you see the finish line there. And it doesn't matter how tired you are, you just sprint because you cannot wait to get across that line because it just feels so awesome. Church, do you imagine what it's going to feel like when we see heaven? And all of this race and all of this running that we've been doing, we just can't wait to get there. And it's going to be so awesome. And all of the people cheering, this great crowd of witnesses cheering us. You can do it. Keep going. Don't give up. Keep going. You're doing great. Paul says, don't give up. Let us not become weary in doing good because we're going to reap such an awesome, awesome harvest. And then the 8th instruction. So keep running. Don't give up. Keep running. Verse 10, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good. Because remember, it's doing good and helping others and loving others that is what God wants us to do in the first place. That's the law that sums up all of the other law. So therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially those who belong to the family of believers. This is how we run. I know that probably most of you are not going to run a half marathon, full marathon, 5K, or I start to say to bishops. The bishop's in there anymore. Some of you might run from the couch to the fridge during a commercial, but, probably most of us aren't going to do a lot of running. But the race that you and I have to do, the running that you and I have to do, is to do good. To love one another. We love our neighbor as ourselves, and we find ways to do good for them. We do this for the community that's around us, which is what we're doing next Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We're trying to do good to the community. But we also do it by doing good to one another. By noticing when one of our brothers is falling and weak and hurting and lifting them up. So my question for you this morning is, are you running? Are you in the race? And not only are you running, but are you keeping in step with the Spirit? Are you running in the footsteps of the Spirit? Can you see that finish line? Can you feel that excitement of crossing it? Or are you so burdened down with some load right now that you can't even imagine that you're ever going to finish this thing? Well, see, church, this morning we want to help you finish the race. We want to help you. If you're here this morning and you're carrying a burden and you need help carrying that burden, we want to help you carry it. We want to offer you some Gatorade and some Power Goo and a bit of banana. And we want to be the encouragement that tells you, keep going, you're doing good, keep going, keep going. Maybe you're here this morning and you're struggling from some sin that's keeping you from running. And you need somebody to gently restore you. That's what we want to do. So often I have people say to me, Lance, I wanted to come forward this morning, but I don't want everybody knowing about the sin that's going on in my life. I understand that. And sometimes it's because we don't want people to judge us. And it's really sad that in our own family here, we can't be honest because we're afraid people are going to be too harsh with us. We need to gently restore our brothers and sisters. And so this morning, maybe you need to be gently restored. And maybe you need to come and say, Lance, I'm really struggling with this. I don't want you to share with everybody, but I need your help. Or go to one of our elders after service and call them aside and say, I'm really struggling with this burden and I just need some help. Don't need it to be made public, but I really need help. Because the reality is, if we don't stay in this race, we're not going to cross the finish line. And then lastly, somebody may be here that hasn't even started the race yet. You know, there's no way you can cross the finish line without starting the race. If you have not started this race, you're not going to make it to heaven. There's no other way. There is no way for you to get to heaven except through Jesus Christ. That's when we start the race. It's when we accept Him, we turn our life around, we repent, and we're baptized, washing our old sins away. When we start down that new path, that is the race. If you're not in the race this morning, I beg you, I plead with you to join the race. If you have questions about it, talk to me afterwards. It's just too important for you to not cross that finish line. This morning, I want to challenge you to run with the Spirit. Keep running. Don't leave your brothers behind. Don't think that you're the pace setter, but run with the Spirit and do things the way that God has called us to do. Encourage each other. Lift each other up. Spur one another on as we wait for that day to approach. If there's anything we as a church can do to help you in your race this morning, please come forward and share that with us while we stand and sing this song.